Welcome back to Notes of Curiosity, exploring ideas that matter. We're diving back into Nick Lane's The Vital Question, picking up where we left off in our exploration of the origins of complex life.
Glad to be back.
Last time, we really dug into Lane's argument about energy constraints, how they've been shaping life's evolution from the very beginning, like way back.
Right, from the get-go.
And today, we're moving on to part 3 of the book, complexity.
Yeah, this is where it gets really good.
This is where Lane tackles the big mystery. How did life go from those simple bacteria to, well, us, to all the complex life we see?
One of the biggest questions in biology.
Absolutely. It's a giant leap, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because bacteria, they've been around forever,
Yeah.
billions of years, and they're everywhere, in all sorts of crazy environments. You said they can even live on concrete.
Yeah, they're amazing, super adaptable. They can survive in all kinds of extreme conditions, but they're simple. Structurally, they've stayed simple, and Lane argues that's because of an energetic bottleneck, a fundamental limit.
So even though they can live anywhere, they can't really get more complex
Yeah.
because of this energy issue.
Exactly, they hit a wall. And to explain this, he uses this idea of polyphyletic radiation.
Okay, now that sounds complicated.
It's not that bad, really. Think of it like this. If oxygen was the big driver of complexity, like the traditional story goes,
Right.
then you'd expect to see tons of different bacteria evolving into complex life all on their own.
Independently.
Yeah, but that didn't happen. Instead, all the complex life we see, eukaryotes, plants, animals, fungi, us, we all came from one single ancestor.
So all complex life is related.
Very closely related, which means it wasn't just oxygen. There had to be some other bottleneck, some structural thing holding them back.
Huh. Interesting. So maybe oxygen played a role, but it wasn't the whole story.
Right. And this is where Lane starts to challenge the usual narrative about the Great Oxidation Event.
Oh, yeah. I remember that from school. Oxygen was supposed to be the hero, right? The big
Yeah.
change that allowed for complex life.
Exactly. But Lane says not so fast. He argues that oxygen wasn't this instant benefit. At first, it was actually toxic.
Toxic.
To most life forms, yeah. It actually caused a huge crisis, not this immediate advantage.
Okay, so how did something that was poisonous become so important for complex life? It doesn't make sense.
It's a great question, and that's exactly what Lane tries to answer. But before we get there, there's this group of organisms, Archaezoa.
Archaezoa. I think I vaguely remember that word from biology class.
They were thought to be like these primitive eukaryotes, missing link kind of things, without mitochondria.
Right, mitochondria.
Yeah.
The powerhouses of the cell.
Exactly. But it turns out, and this is a big twist, they're not actually primitive ancestors.
They're not.
Nope. They're actually descendants of complex cells that simplified over time.
Wow, really? So they started complex and then got simpler.
Exactly. And that's a crucial point because it shows that once a cell gets complex, that structure, it sticks around, even when they adapt to a simpler environment.
So even though they were living in these low-energy places, they still held on to that basic complexity.
Huh. Yeah, it's not easily lost. And it leads us to another key point, the fact that all eukaryotic cells are amazingly similar.
Oh, right. I remember Lane saying that a mushroom and a human, we all share the same basic machinery inside our cells.
It's wild, and it's not just on the surface, it's in our DNA. It all points to one single event, one time where complex life arose.
One time.
That's
I
incredible.
mean, it's everything we see, all the complex life on Earth, came from this single event.
It's a pretty huge implication. And to explain how it might have happened, Lane brings in this idea, the hydrogen hypothesis, developed by Bill Martin.
The hydrogen hypothesis.
Yeah, Lane calls it a Nobel Prize-worthy idea.
Like
Basically, it says that two simple cells got together, teamed up,
A partnership.
symbiosis,
Right.
an archaeon, which was like the host,
Okay.
and a bacterium that made hydrogen. And this bacterium would eventually become, you guessed it.
The mitochondria. Right. So this partnership, this is how we got mitochondria. But how did that lead to more complexity?
That's the cool part. See, the bacterium, the future mitochondria, didn't just provide a little extra energy, it completely changed the cell's structure.
In what way?
Okay, to understand this, we need to talk about how cells power themselves. It's this process called proton flow.
Proton flow.
Yeah, it's like an electrical current, but instead of electrons, it uses protons, positively charged hydrogen atoms.
Okay, I'm following.
So cells create this flow of protons across a membrane. It builds up energy on one side, like a dam, and then that flow powers all sorts of work in the cell.
So it's like a tiny microscopic energy storage system.
Exactly. Now, here's the thing. Bacteria, they're simple. They generate this proton flow across their outer membrane, the boundary between them and the outside world,
Right?
and that's a big problem if you want to get complex.
How's
Imagine trying to power a whole city with just one power plant. It's not going to work very well. You need more surface area to make more energy. But if bacteria get bigger, their outer membrane gets stretched too thin, becomes inefficient.
I get it. So they can't just keep growing their outer membrane to make more energy? There's a limit.
Exactly. It's a structural trap. But eukaryotic cells, they figured out a way around it.
Huh.
They internalized the membrane. The bacterium, the future mitochondria, brought in a whole new system of membranes, way more surface area for proton gradients.
We're like building power plants inside the city instead of just one on the outskirts.
Exactly. And this was revolutionary. It meant the cell could finally make enough energy to get more complex. The nucleus, the ER, the Golgi, they all became possible because of this new energy source.
Wow. So this tiny bacterium, the mitochondria, it really set the stage for all of complex life.
That's what Lane is arguing. And
Yeah.
it gets even crazier when you think about what this means for things like sex, aging, even death.
Okay, now I have to hear more about that, but we'll have to save it for next time.
Looking forward to it.
I am too. It's incredible to think about how this one tiny event, this partnership, could have such far-reaching consequences. And to think that we all carry this legacy within every cell in our bodies, it's truly mind-blowing.
It really makes you appreciate the interconnectedness of everything.
Absolutely. We'll be back soon to continue this deep dive into the vital question. Stay curious. So before we got sidetracked by mitochondria, we were talking about how they were essential for the evolution of complex life. Gave it the energy it needed, the structure. But you were saying it goes even deeper than that mitochondria might even be connected to things like sex and aging.
That's right. It's not just about structure. The hydrogen hypothesis, it goes on to suggest that lots of the things that make eukaryotes unique, sex, aging, even death, they're all tied to this ancient symbiosis.
Okay, that's a big claim. How does Lane even connect those dots? Mitochondria and, well, sex.
Well, it starts with the genes. When the bacterium was absorbed, its genes got integrated into the host's genome. So now you've got this mix, and it creates conflict.
Conflict, like inside the cell.
Exactly. The host cell wants to replicate as a whole, as one unit, but the bacterial genes, they still have some of their own interests they want to replicate too.
So it's like a power struggle on a microscopic level.
Exactly. And Lane argues that this struggle, this tension, is what drove the evolution of sex.
Hold on, sex. How does a fight over genes lead to something as, well, complicated as sex?
Think about it. Sex is all about mixing genes, shuffling them up, creating diversity. And that diversity is super important. It helps populations adapt, survive changes. Lane's saying that sex evolved as a way to deal with this tension from the merger, a way to keep those bacterial genes in check.
So sex is a way to maintain order, keep the cell from falling apart because of these conflicting genes. That's a pretty wild idea.
It changes how you view things, right?
Right.
And it goes even further. Lane links this conflict and all the compromises the cell had to make to aging itself.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Mitochondria and aging. How does that work?
Well, remember those bacterial genes, the ones that are looking out for themselves. Eukaryotic cells, they had to find a way to control them.
Right.
And one way they did that was to limit how much mitochondria could replicate, to keep them from taking over.
Smart.
But it's a trade-off. See, over time, mitochondria start to get damaged. They don't work as well. And Lane argues that this decline, this is a major part of why we age.
So aging isn't just some pre-programmed clock ticking down. It's because of this ancient battle going on inside our cells.
That's the idea. Aging, even death, they're not just inevitable. They're part of what it means to be complex life, a consequence of that original symbiotic event.
Wow. It's incredible. This whole story, it's playing out in every cell in our bodies right now. This conflict, these compromises, it's all part of who we are.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? And it highlights how important energy is to, well, everything. It's not just about keeping us going. It's woven into the fabric of our existence, how we age, how we reproduce, everything.
And if it's so fundamental here, it makes you wonder about life on other planets. If they exist, would they face the same challenges? the same solution.
Exactly. That's what Lane explores in the last part of the book. He suggests that these same principles, they would apply anywhere in the universe.
So even alien life, it would have to deal with these energy problems.
If it wants to be complex, yeah. He even talks about what kinds of energy sources might be out there on other planets, how those could shape the evolution of life in completely different ways.
But even though we haven't found aliens yet, we can still make some guesses about them, based on what we know about energy.
That's the beauty of it. Understanding energy gives us this incredible tool to investigate life. Not just here, but everywhere.
It's amazing. This whole deep dive into the vital question, it's been eye-opening. It's changed how I think about life, evolution, even myself.
Yeah, I guess you question everything, right?
It really does. And speaking of questioning, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our dive. What are your final thoughts on the book? Would you recommend it?
Absolutely. I'd recommend it to anyone who's, curious about life, where it came from, how it works. It's definitely challenging in places, but Lane, he's a really good writer. Explains these complicated ideas in a way that makes sense.
I agree. I was highlighting things left and right.
Yeah.
It's one of those books I know I'll come back to. And what makes it so good is it's not just rehashing what we already know. It's a totally new way of looking at things.
That's what's so exciting, this whole new framework for understanding life. And it all comes back to energy.
Yeah, it's like this hidden thread connecting everything.
He takes you on this journey from the Earth's formation through the early stages of life, all the way to this crazy symbiotic event that led to complexity. And he doesn't shy away from the big stuff either. Sex, aging, death. He ties it all back to that partnership in ourselves.
And then he takes it even further, applies it to life beyond Earth. It's mind-blowing to think that what happened here, it might be happening on other planets too.
It really expands your perspective, doesn't it? It makes you realize how much we still don't know.
Speaking of which, what are some of the things you hope listeners will take away from this deep dive? What really stuck with you?
I think the biggest thing is this. Energy. It's not just what we eat or how we power our cars. It's fundamental to life itself. It's been shaping evolution from the very beginning. And once you see that, it changes how you view everything.
It's, like you said, a whole new lens. We take our own existence for granted, but this book, it makes you realize we're the result of billions of years of evolution,
Yeah.
driven by this need for energy.
And it makes you think about possibilities. What if life on other planets found different ways to solve that energy problem? What would that even look like?
It's a question that really sparks the imagination.
Yeah.
And it goes back to something you said earlier. Could there be complex life out there that doesn't even use proton gradients, that
Yeah.
doesn't have anything like mitochondria?
It's a wild thought, isn't it? We just don't know. But that's the beauty of science, the mystery. It keeps us asking questions, keeps us exploring.
The vital question definitely does that. It reminds us how much there is left to discover.
And that's pretty exciting, don't you think?
It really is. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the vital question. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. It's been a fascinating conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. It's always great to talk about these big ideas.
And to our listeners, if you're intrigued by what we've discussed, definitely check out The Vital Question. It'll make you think about life in a whole new way.
Keep those minds curious.
And be sure to join us next time as we continue to explore ideas that matter right here on Notes of Curiosity.